kompetisi ini bukan hanya tentang menang, tetapi tentang bagaimana setiap peserta menyuarakan masa depan. Dari Sabang hingga Merauke, para delegasi hadir membawa semangat, budaya, dan harapan. Bersatu dalam satu panggung argumentasi terbesar untuk SMA di Indonesia. Selamat datang di Lomba Debat Indonesia 2025. Siapkan argumen terbaikmu, tunjukkan potensimu, dan jadilah generasi pemikir masa depan.
Cika, dia telah lulus SMA, tapi bingung mau kuliah di mana?
Jangan bingung, mari bergabung bersama kami di Universitas Atmajaya, Yogyakarta.
UAJY memiliki 7 fakultas dan 14 program studi yang dapat jadi pilihan loh.
Jangan khawatir, UAJY menyediakan miliaran beasiswa yang bisa kamu dapatkan. Tentunya, terdapat program seleksi yang masih dibuka. Informasi lebih lanjut dapat mengunjungi situs pmb.uajy.ac.id. So, tunggu apa lagi?
Bakal nyesel loh kalau nggak daftar sekarang.
Welcome to Yogyakarta, the city of students. The city where a significant number of public and private schools and universities are located. Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta, a private university established on September 27, 1965 by Yayasan Slamet Riyadi Yogyakarta.
Dalam bahasa Sanskerta, Atma berarti jiwa dan Jaya berarti unggul, sehingga Atmajaya berarti jiwa yang unggul. Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta juga memiliki semboyan dalam bahasa Latin Serviens in Lumine Veritatis, yang artinya melayani dalam cahaya kebenaran.
The four core values upheld by UAJY are excellence, inclusivity, humanism, and integrity. Excellence implies equality or being better than others. Inclusivity means encompassing all social groups. Humanism, the definition, means to serve the common interest of fellow humans. Integrity means adherence to the moral and ethical principles, honesty, reliability, consistency in words and acts, and a sense of responsibility. UAJY supports diverse values, cultures, religions, races, ethnicities, and languages as a university with students from all across Indonesia. UAJY's diversity is an asset for further collaboration and synergy in preparing for a better future.
Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta memiliki 4 kampus yang terbagi menjadi Kampus 1, Gedung Santo Alfonsus. Kampus 2, Gedung Santo Thomas Aquinas. Kampus 3, Gedung Santo Bonaventura. Dan Kampus 4, Gedung Bunda Teresa. Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta memiliki fakultas dengan berbagai program studi sarjana, program studi magister, dan international undergraduate program.
Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta is a second home for every individual to develop and share information, and a university with a high-quality education to attain unlimited aspirations and accomplishments. To achieve the goals, UAJY provides classrooms with a hybrid learning system, laboratories in each faculty as a room to explore, co-working space as a discussion room, medical personnel who are always available in the university clinic room, and a library that provide books, e-books, and digital libraries to open a wide window onto the world in various ways.
UAJY selalu konsisten memberikan pelayanan yang didasari rasa solidaritas kepada sesama. Selama saya bekerja di UAJY, saya merasakan kekeluargaan yang sangat kuat menjadi dasar bagi seluruh sivitas akademika.
UAJY endeavors to develop graduates who are ethical, creative, innovative, adaptive, transformational, collaborative, and benevolent. All these are aimed to help students achieve their future dreams.
Mendidik itu mengajarkan ilmu pengetahuan dan berbela rasa serta berkontribusi pada kesejahteraan masyarakat. Hal tersebut menjadi landasan fundamental bagi Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta untuk mencetak generasi muda yang unggul di bidangnya dan memiliki integritas moral yang tinggi. Saya bangga menjadi bagian dari Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta. Viva UAJY, kami bangga ada di sini.
Semestinya engkau bisa
mencobanya lebih bijak, semampunya berusaha, berjuang jujur, berkarya, tanpa pernah meragukan kemampuan pada kita. Sungguh percayakan saja, kita istimewa bisa.
sungguh sebuah karunia.
Kita saling jaga rasa,
Generasi anak bangsa,
anak bangsa, karena jujur itu juara.
that I can input the ballot correctly and properly. For the proposition Bali, who's the first speaker? Rakhaila. Second will be Tirza. Okay. Third speaker Edgar. And the reply will be Rakhaila. Okay. There will be, this is an open round, so there will be a verbal announcement. Yeah. For opposition, who's speaking first? Sorry? Nicholas. Okay. Second will be? Kelly. Okay. The speaker Sharon, and then reply will be? Nicholas. All right. All right. I think we can officially start the debate since the ballot is now proper. Hi everyone. Welcome to round 5 of LDI English 2025. Woo! My name is Dio, and I'll be chairing this round. Along with me, a very wonderful set of judges, Miss Cecilia and Miss Dia, right? Yeah. Yep. So, I think just general reminder, please maintain the quorum for observers. Please maintain equity specifically for debaters. Please avoid overgeneralization because this motion is about Asian as much as it is too close to home. Please have fun, most importantly. Without further ado, I call upon the first speaker. I think you can use the mic to comment the POI or like to offer the POI. So without further ado, I'll call upon the first prop. The floor is yours. Here.
Check. Right then. 3, 2, 1. Panels, if I had a penny for every single tourist who litter in Bali, for every single tourist who have deteriorated, who have berated a local in Bali, I'd be a millionaire by now. Proud to propose. Before I go on to my arguments, I'd like to posit 4 main points of world building. A, the current world is inherently progressive. That is to say, people become more aware of minorities. People become more empathetic towards them. That is to say that they also respect minorities to a certain degree, although this is not completely true, judging by the fact that there's still tourists out there, that there's still people out there who still underestimate them at the end of the day. But secondly, then for our mechanization, we think that we posit to you 3 things. We think that A, individual humility means that you lower yourself to a certain degree because, and I quote unquote, you know your place. That is to say, it starts off to show respect and should be reciprocated with respect because that is how the Asian culture is actually taught from household to household. But only when those tourists are from Asian countries do they understand that value of certain reciprocity, which most tourists actually don't come from Asia. I will actually explain on a while later. Exactly when prices of Bali and Japan is geared in a way to actually benefit the Western tourism instead of the actual local tourists. But also B, we think that this narrative inherently means that you're developing a subconscious that Asian people bow down to you. It's still subconscious even though you don't intend it to be. This makes the tourist that comes become inherently arrogant. I will explain the likelihood why later on my second argument. But see then, we're specifically opposing the emphasis on the value that is the glorification of Asian is very nice, is very kind. The Asian will listen to you no matter what, not the value in itself. This means that you value your rational calculus over your humility because we think that arrogance and humility is not black and white. I think that it's in a spectrum. What do we want to promote under said proposition is why the spectrum should be here, not in humility, not in arrogance specifically, right? Our burden is simple. I will prove to you on why this culture is actually harmful for Asian minorities either way, whether you're with another Asian people or with Western people, and how secondly our counter will actually benefit the Asian people more. We simply win this debate. On to my first substantive then regarding Asian on Asian. I bring you this urgency. Let's broaden the spectrum outside of tourism. I will get into that later, and bring in concern in many industrial Asian countries being twofold. A, corporate slaves in particular, in countries such as Japan, China, etc., other than they don't want to get fired, the reason why they're what would you call typically a pushover is because they don't want to feel disrespectful to their boss. They want to keep their pride. That's why they keep bowing down to their boss in the end of the day, and to think because they inherently think that their boss is higher than them, and I quote, deserve respect. But also B, this then means that this allows the higher up to do whatever, or at the very least pushing on the edge of what is legal, because worker protection, keep in mind, only handle very worst case scenarios. If your boss just decides to like add slightly more workload to you, you cannot do anything about it because the likelihood of their tackling it is actually quite low. But secondly then, on Asian in other countries, we think that in each country, of course, in the country, there's already, the Asians, there is already a minority group at the end of the day. They already face pressure from the majority day to day. They don't need additional pressure being the workforce that's stereotyping them. They don't need the pressure of their boss thinking that they're a pushover and therefore can dump any amount of workload into them at the end of the day. We think they simply don't need that in the current status quo. But also secondly, on schools, when you're Asian, due to the emphasis of not only you pick upon for simply being different, of simply being Chinese, we think that they don't think you can retaliate if bullied. They don't think that you can retaliate if you do get harmed at the end of the day, or very much worst case under their side, if you think yourself you cannot defend on them simply because it will be disrespectful towards the bullies. But also then, what is the likelihood of this? We bring you two things. One, on our side, we think it's likely when parents themselves have experienced this. They're likely to teach the middle ground when parents themselves have experienced this, right? They have suffered on this and they don't want to see their children suffer too. And because the world is inherently more progressive now, that's why we think most rational parents under our side will actually opt into this teaching, because it would actually protect their children in addition to protecting a part of their culture. But secondly, sure, there might be backlash on conservative parents, etc. We say it's fine under two faults. We think that A, conservative people are already marginal anyways in the current status quo, and it's typically very old people at the end of the day. But B, we posit to you that no amount of social validation from your very spicy conservative auntie is actually worth the comfortability of your life as a whole. But before I go on to my second argument, are there any points? Sorry. Okay, no points, all right. On to my second argument then, regarding Asian or non-Asian. We bring you this layer of urgency. We think that Bali is a tourist area and many other tourism area exactly use this to their leverage. When that many tourists in other tourism area that is Asian use this narrative to their leverage in two folds. A, they don't respect the people in such reciprocative way because their respect are taught by Western parents are inherently different from Asian parents, because we think the respect taught by Western parents are something that is inherently lesser, or at least it's not as strict, at least in where they're taught. But B, when they have minimal respect on people, that inherently means that they have minimal respect on the land in itself, because they don't feel threatened or they don't feel opposed by the people. That is to say, they think locals would do nothing if they throw away trash wherever, etc. That's why there's so many trash in Bali. They don't respect the people, they aren't scared of the people, they can do whatever they want there, or at least they think that they can. But also, what is our solvency? We think under our side specifically, we solve this under two folds. One, we solve this when instead you are taught to be kind, but you know your place. That is to say that you don't know your place. That is to say that you know your place and your words specifically. You'll be most likely to stand up for yourself against these people if you do encounter them, especially if you're living in a tourist area in Bali, you encounter them quite often. But secondly, we think that each parent values humility, sure, but we don't think that they want their children to be shoved down. They don't want their children to be pushed over. They don't want children to be harmed at the end of the day. What are the impacts of this, right? We think that the impacts under their side, there's two main harms. One, stereotypes of Asian countries making tourism in these countries bad for the local. For example, when Russian tourists berates a Balinese local, when tourists damage property on Japan, for example, sure, they can go to jail, etc. But in comparison, we prevent it under our side of the house when they at least notice, when they at least know that these locals are capable of standing up for themselves and would not let these tourists do whatever they want. The check and balance is simply better in ours. But secondly, to the global eye, your people looks like a pushover. The region is treated as a playground because of the treatment of that thing at the end of the day. We think that the harms on tourism, they simply outweigh it. But also, but lastly then, Wing, sure, they can say that, oh, but that would mean lesser tourism on our side of the house. We still think that it's inherently fine under three folds. A, if standing up for yourself triggers lesser tourists, it means that those tourists in particular probably come here to cause trouble and do whatever they want. We don't want those tourists anyways. The locals don't want those tourists anyways, exactly because those tourists usually are the ones spending the most minimal and causing the most trouble. But be Asian country still has leverage of cheaper prices compared to the dollars, for example. That's why tourism will still be okay under our side. But see, we still have the beauty of tourism, the nuance of it, such as Kuta Beach, such as Raja Ampat, etc., etc. These are things that you cannot find on any other countries, even the Caribbean, even the tradition here, the Balinese dances here is something that you cannot replicate on other regions in particular, right? We're willing to take this for the locals, for their own sake, for the minority sake, for all this, for every single corporate slaves in Japan. We're willing to take this harm. All reasons above, proud to propose.
All right, thank you so much, First Prop, for that speech. Before we proceed with the first op, just gentle reminder because this debate is recorded, so please make sure that you actually speak down, speak to the mic so that the viewers can hear your speech as well and appreciate your speech as well. Yeah, with that being said, first op here. Yeah, make sure you test dulu mic-nya ya.
After this debate, we will exchange thanks and shake hands. It is not a simple matter of sportsmanship, but rather the humility that derives through this behavior. I think we tell you from the very get-go that generation after generation, we are taught this principle because it embodies us. Humility is not about lowering yourself to such a low degree that people can take advantage about you. It's about looking upwards and knowing that there is more to achieve because you yourself understand that you are not some great absolutist. But more importantly, what's the framework? I think they were very uncharitable with the case that they gave us. Firstly, what does the emphasis look like? They didn't tell you. I think it looks like the Asian society, which schools teaching you with parents reminding you that you need to be humble, and it's giving that example as a parenting principle. So it's not something that's glorified, it's simply something that we value in a society and that people teach. But how about individual humility? What does it actually look like? I think it means being humble, understanding, being reasonable. Not to say that you don't care about yourself and you have no self-value. I think this is a very uncharitable case on side proposition. It means that you're less arrogant and you're less egoistic and you're less prideful because you understand your position, not in a manner that has to require you to lower it. I can know my own position without making me feel like a slug. I can understand that my own humanity exists while other people also have their own. That is just called respect. It doesn't mean that you let yourself get thrown around. It's called self-value. But more importantly, what's this narrative? I think they never properly characterize what this narrative looks like. I think who provides it looks like the environment itself and the people around us. But more importantly, the people believe it because it's something that is valued in society, right? So things like families, parents teach you that it's important to be humble. There is humility from a very young age. Why is justified then? I think it exists to provide a sense of humility to the basis of behavior because you're not going to learn humility anywhere randomly. There's a lot of principles that you can learn and take up from the environment. And the more you spend time around the environment, you'll pick up a lot more traits. I think humility is something that's important to exist in society because then you pick that up as part of your nature. It's not something that you randomly were born with. Humility is something you need to learn. That's why it's important. It's vital then because Asian culture already incorporates it. Because Asian culture looks like what? I think it looks like Asian cultures that have a lot of filiality. We really respect our elders. But it also looks like a seniority thing. We love our seniors and we respect them. We bow to them. Well, how about this? Competitivity. We're very competitive most of the times. That's exactly why it's important to have this level of humility to understand and to lower ourselves, not to make ourselves look bad, but to simply understand within our current status that we are like this. It's not coercion because you opt to it, you chose into it, even if it was taught, well, it's still a good teaching at the end of the day. It's something that's good. But let's actually address their case then. They tell you about the harms to Asian culture, like tourists who demean Asians and becoming arrogant. Okay, but many tourists, regardless in status quo, are already arrogant. We get the point that maybe there will be more people who are incentivized to be arrogant, but here's the thing, no one supports this. No one wants arrogant tourists. Everyone looks down on that, but we'll actually extend on that later. But also, when they say workers are mistreated or that people are vulnerable because they are lowering themselves, I think this is a very cherry-pick example. Why? Because they assume that the worker themselves is lowering themselves and that the boss will take advantage of them. If the boss too was in this same society, why would they not practice the same humility that was emphasized in their society? It doesn't make sense. This is a very one-sided case in the first place. But also, issues they told you, like mistreatment of locals, is a very minor case because it means this only exists on the side of tourists. But let's respond. Things like littering, being rude, and being arrogant is not because you are because of humility, but it's because of individual level arrogance that those tourists were not taught properly. And it's not because you're humble and nice that people take advantage of you. It's simply because they do not understand the importance of being nice. But either way, if this was such a big issue, then it's so much more important that our society truly learns humility, so that if we decide to be tourists and go to a different country, we can be respectful. Isn't that also symmetrical then? It's important to be for tourists to be respectful. I think then it would be pretty much the same when you teach them to be humility. It would spread a better level of nicety. But also, let's talk about substantives. One, the social framework. I think Asian is very values itself around this principle. It revolves itself around it. What it actually looks like under 3 principles. One, strong respect for seniors. Things like in schools, in society, you always bound your seniors, you always greet them. But secondly, there's a large community bond. Because when you're able to be considerate, a large community is operatable. Obviously, a community which constantly is in conflict won't be able to operate, right? But more importantly, 3, there's less social conflicts. Because if, say, someone bumps into you, you're not going to make it into a big deal because you believe, hey, well, it's all right, don't worry about it, it's not a big case. What does this lead to then? 3 things. A, social forgiveness, because people are willing to move on and forgive and forget. B, the ability to, move on because you're not going to think about it for the rest of your day. But C, sportsmanship, just like how in this debate, if I'm humble, I'm willing to admit my loss and walk up to a proposition and shake their hands and say, it's okay, that was a good debate, guys. What are the impacts then? A, there's a generational principle, because it's passed on as a culture, and this is an embodiment of something good. But B, there's a societal consensus, because if everyone opts into humility, then naturally the environment will be far better. Why is this important? Because when the society is able to disregard pride and they opt into cooperation, it means that things like behavioral habits, like things like greeting, bowing, being respectful is something that's normalized and that's something that's appreciated. But not to say that it doesn't exist on proposition, it's just to say that it obviously exists less if you don't emphasize the teaching of it, if you don't want to have a certain emphasis. Because people can now opt into it, that it's not always normalized, that you can, if you were or arrogant, it's something that's okay. Why is arrogance something that's so bad then? I think it's because you encompass yourself, you isolate externalities, and you ostracize others. That I believe I'm right regardless of anything, and the consensus is lost. You opt into more conflict when there is a certain issue because you believe you yourself are right and you're not willing to admit or concede on that. But it has a chance to then be normalized, because arrogancy is harmful when you feel that it hurts you so much more. What is the example? If I was humble and I lost, I'd admit my defeat and move on. If I was arrogant, I would keep it on my mind that I didn't deserve to lose, I could have done better, I did deserve better. That's a problem with arrogance. It doesn't allow you to accept anything. What does this mean? A, less self-growth, and B, less self-acceptance. What does this lead to? It means that you yourself individually are not fulfilled when you are arrogant. That is exactly why it's so important to be humble. This has a chance to cause people to be less fulfilled, especially in Asia where there's such a large competitive scene. I think it's so important then everyone understands shared humility, so that there's much more sportsmanship, and so everyone understands that, hey, this is something we should appreciate, something we should normalize. But more importantly, B, the community embraces it because we share that value together. It means what? You are rewarded. You feel nice when you are treating other people nicely because they treat you nice in return. That is why it's so good to be humble. That's why it's good to feel nice. But secondly, I think on an individual level, there's 2 premises. One, in terms of fulfillment. We talked to you about this in the first case, but let's expand on it. One, the environment facilitates humility, which means that if in Asian society you're taught in humility, and this is something that's emphasized, it means what? Your friends are likely to be humble too. It means that your family, your environment, and the society itself that you live in, including your workplace, including your boss, which is mischaracterized, would also be somewhat humble and nice and practice humility to a certain degree. But second, I think there's a level of individuality. The problem with arrogance is then that you require validation. Why? Because I want to be placed on a pedestal. I want you to compliment me. I want you to praise me because I believe I am better than you. That is the problem with arrogance. And this is not something you can mischaracterize. This is arrogance. The whole point of arrogance is the fact that you yourself feel you're better, right? That is why it leads to things like codependency, that you require external validation no matter what, and it makes it ingenuine because you encompass yourself first and foremost. But before I continue, any POIs? Continuing. Okay, why then does this not exist within individual level humility? I think it's simple. One, everyone or the majority of people opt into it. It means that within society, if everyone is already humble, you're likely to be, say, part of that. You already incorporate and encompass yourself within it. It means your social circles are also likely to be very humble and nice. And it means the things that they teach you at school, at home, and at everywhere is likely to also encompass the same things. That I don't want to be, say, different. I don't want to be arrogant because everyone else is also very nice to me. That even if I were arrogant, I'd opt to be nicer because, well, I feel bad for treating people like that when they're treating me so good. But more importantly, I think secondly, even if the humility was ingenuine, which maybe they'll touch on, I think it's okay if humility is ingenuine because the thing is, it still provides the same benefits as in, even if I bow to someone ingenuinely, whether or not it is genuine, I think the effects that they see is that I'm still being respectful, and therefore the impacts of the impacts of humility is not dependent on things like how you truly feel, whether or not you're genuine. It's just the fact that you're doing it, and the fact that you're willing to do it shows other people that you're willing to, accept and be more respectful. I think the weighing then is simple. in their society, they want more people to stand up for themselves. But in this context, the only way you stand up for yourself is you become more rude, you become more arrogant, you become more self-centered. I think on our side of the house, even that still exists, but to a degree that we are able to control ourselves. So proud to oppose.
All right, thanks so much, first op, for that speech. To continue the debate, second prop, here.
Check. Trigger warning on minorities. Sumut needed to prove two things, and both things if they wanted to in this debate. A, that the emphasis won't be that extreme when it will be, but B, why is being humility that important that people have to double down, and why being arrogant is really that extreme according to their really uncharitable framing about how arrogant actually look like. We think it's never enough for LO to actually say that it's going to only look like how people are going to teach you, when this is exactly what happens in the status quo, and this is what they're not doing on their side of the house, right? With that being said, I'll crystallize you this debate on three folds. Firstly, how does the emphasis look like? We already posited to you in P1 that it looks like a narrative that is spread, right? This is to say that it's going to become a stereotype that every Asians have to become a humility, and every Asians have this stereotype that they are humility, and it's going to be spread in like a really broad spectrum. We think that why is this likely then? When the narrative is spread, it reaches a large spectrum, right, of people. This looks like it reaches about how Asians among Asians itself, how it's going to reach Asians among the tourists that comes to their place, but crucially, it actually reached Asians as minority in other places, that is going to reach the idea and how they're going to act act towards them, right? This is inherently bad because it becomes an overgeneralization of the Asian itself. Then it gives them the social pressure to fit in this standard. They're forced to fit into something they're not, because individual humility is something that is hard to apply. Why so? Second point of framing in terms of individual humility. A, there's a requirement for you to become in that state, right? This isn't to say that their framing is inherently wrong, because this isn't to say that individual humility is just smiling towards other people and it's enough, when it's not. We think that individual humility have a lot of requirements to do so, right? If you're only to say about how this is only going to look like people being nice, this is already something existing in the status quo. This is not individual humility. Individual humility looks like how you actually have to have the agent to smile to every tourist, and how you actually have to make every tourist feel comfortable towards you, right? This is going to be harmful because A, not every agents have the incentive to do so, because this is going to require a lot of incentive, right? But B, then even if they do so, it's still unjust for you to force people who don't want to into this really uncharitable stereotype. The second thing on the individual humility, then, we think that our model will work perfectly when we actually shift the spectrum of how Asians can be arrogant, and we're willing to bite the bullet of their entire second argument. We think that it's okay for people to actually felt into can be arrogant sometimes, because it is needed in society. You needed to actually approach and make it into make yourself But we think that this is going to be more ideal, because the delta then becomes on their side of the house. People have to force into this humility itself. When under our side of the house, they have the choice to do so, and they can have the opportunity to become arrogant, and there's no social norm that's going to attack you on on their side of the house. But third thing to note on Asian societies, then, we think that they exist in various places, right? Asia itself and other places that makes them minorities. But it's crucial for both, because A, you actually experience meeting tourists that are actually going to be crucial for you to actually make sure that their view is nice. But B, in terms of how you be around other people, that is going to be an idealization, and it's going to be really bad, because now you're oppressed towards other people, because there's a stereotype that is going to applicable to you in other places. Three contributions coming from our speech, then. First, clash in terms of urgency. Second, clash in terms of how this will impact the Asians. Last, also run in terms of societal views for these Asians. First, clash in terms of urgency. Two things. Firstly, they say how about social conflict is going to social conflict is going to be really bad, because people should not be arrogant at all, right? We think that what they're opting into is about the humility itself. We think that it's going to be harmful, because A, we think that if you really want to make the delta massive, they have to concede to the fact that people are going to be forced on their side of the house, right? This is going to be really bad, because the idea of itself is going to be real hard, because now we think that people don't even hate each other in the status quo, right? We question why this is even this is even necessary at the first place. Why do they have to really fix this conflict that's non-existent? But B, then, I think that they kill their own case when they say about how they concede about how humility don't have to be that genuine, and how they can actually concede at the very least the approach is still the same and still going to reach them anyways. This is extremely harmful because now you're actually ruining the fact that humility, what makes humility quote unquote beautiful at the first place. It shows about how the effort that you actually put into the humility, this is what they should have protected on their side of the house, but they're choosing to double down. Second thing they bring was about how it's going to make the societal the society consensus, and they're going to make people opt into better cooperation on their side of the house. Firstly, exactly when it's bad, right? When they actually have to make a whole society agree to this overgeneralization, you're actually going to oppress one group, and it's going to be really bad because you don't even want to opt into it at the first place. But secondly, then, with that, if you really want to talk about cooperation, it's going to be better on our side of the house because now they have the chance to actually stand up from themselves and not actually going to be oppressed by the idea that they have to be quote unquote humility. Before my second clash, yes. Why is being arrogant so important? Exactly what I said. They have to stand up for themselves. If you're in a scenario where you're getting oppressed, it's not like you're going to force them to double down, and it's important for you to be arrogant for some instance because you actually have to fight for yourself, right? But second clash in terms of how this will impact the Asians, right? I think that this should be weighed the highest because we actually nudge the most actors in this debate. Let's look at the comparative that happens on both sides of the house then. On the opposition, it's unlikely for people to opt in at the first place, right? Firstly, because it requires a lot of things to do so, but secondly, it actually is literally burdening for them to stay in this stereotype. But we think that let's engage to their best case scenario then. Their best case scenario is about how people actually have the incentive to do so, and how people are actually going to have the really good idea about how Asians is going to be really good. Firstly, I think that Asian view is not even that bad in the status quo. We question why this is even necessary at the first place. If they really want to make about how Asians is going to look at really good, for instance, we think this is unnecessary because it's still going to be giving the burden. We think that the view of Asians is already good from the get-go. But second thing, we think that the good view actually makes tourism comes too much, right? We think that tourism that comes in a really large amount is going to be really harmful. This is what we posit to you in P1. They fail to engage. We think that when actually tourism is going to come in with the idea that people are going to be nice to you either ways, they're going to become arrogant and they're going to make your resources bad in that in the Asian place itself. This is going to be really harmful, not only for the societal norm, but how they're going to be acting freely and how they're going to be arrogant and they're going to be acting as if there's not they know that people are going to act nice to them anyways. But on side government, we can posit to you the idea that there is still teaching that's going to exist on our side of the house, right? We think that if they really want to champion humility, when that humility goes to the extent that is too far, we question why this is even necessary when we can actually posit to you the teachings that is going to for you to respect your elder, for example. This is already enough to actually make the society under our side going to be good, and it's not going to be worsening when it's not going to be burdening. We have the arrogance is going to be worse, is not going to be as bad as their uncharitable framing. Within the fact that their arrogance not only mean about how you're actually going to think that you're better than other people, it goes beyond that. It goes how the fact that you can actually open up to other people and how you can actually stand up on yourself. Lastly, in terms of extension towards the societal views of the Asian itself. When that is hard, it's going to be really bad because now the societal view have the actual idea of how people are going to be nice, right? But we already posit to you how it is unlikely for people to opt in at the first place. This is going to lead into the fact that they are feeding lies towards these people, and they are going to be feeling having their expectation lower down because they have the idea that people are actually going to be good. But when they actually go into that places, people are actually not as nice as usual. It's going to be affecting the social view that, of the Asians itself, and for that reason, it's going to be really harmful because now people are going to be having the idea that they have been feeding lies, for example, because people are not going to be opting in. We think that for that reason, as we managed to prove about how this can actually nudge Asians better, and we already posit to you how arrogance is not going to be that bad. For that reason, proud to propose.
All right, thanks so much, second prop, for that speech. To continue the debate, second op.
Am I audible like this? Okay. Start my speech in 3, 2,
1. The moment that proposition took the burden that is going to be very bad just exactly for tourists is the moment that they lose this debate. We tell you that tourism itself is never going to be the delta of this debate. First reason then, we think that the delta of the debate is never about tourism. Their framing on tourism is only a margin when we're talking about a really specific context. Understand that not the entirety of Asia is just about tourism. For example, Medan, for example, we do not even really care that much about our tourism because that is just not what is important for our nation, for our part as a whole. We tell you that it's only relying on a specific context, and therefore their margin is only going to be large when we're talking about a specific context, which is not the burden of this motion. But also second then, the delta of this debate, it should be about how humility itself is going to impact each and every individual that's actually living in an Asian society when we're talking about the context of humility. Few responses to this because we're being charitable. First, we tell you, when they try to tell to you that the problem in tourism in Bali is going to be about humility, we tell that it's wrong. Why? First, we tell you that Bali itself is sadly dependent on tourism. We are very dependent on like external tourists, for example, and it's never the problem on the current status quo. The problem is never about humility because guess what? Every Balinese will probably see themselves as the same way as they see other tourists, for example, because you're both still human. We tell you that you're at the very, very basic level, you still value yourself as the same way as other people because you're both still human, and that's all. On to the next extension then. On the first issue, first, on how you're going to value yourself. There's I tell you that just because you have humility, that means that you're going to let other people to just trample on you just because that you feel the need to actually like lower yourself. We tell you that humility is never about lowering yourself to a certain degree. We tell you that humility is always about looking up and understanding that there's always someone that is like better than you, for example, right? Few reasons then. First, why exactly is arrogance something that's really, why exactly that we are probably going to be arrogant? First reason, arrogance itself is the need for you to prove to other people and the need of you to have like other external validation for you to feel like a certain sense of hope. The reason why I flaunt or flex is because I don't care about how other people perceive me. At the very basic, human beings like to actually be seen as someone that is superior. You naturally feel the need to flaunt. For example, the entire reason why I joined this competition, the entire reason why any of us joining this competition is to prove ourselves, is to prove and to tell them that yes, we are able to do this. This is exactly why that it's going to be really important on our side of the house, because arrogance is something that's so deeply ingrained inside each and every one of us. Why then is humility really important, especially when we're talking about like an Asian context? First, Asian context is really hyper competitive. We put our own value in our performance, in our work, in our grade, in our income, in our family. Every single this kind of stuff is going to be very important for you. When you are living in a society that value this sort of like performance, it is inherent for you to fail in each and every time. We tell you that being humble itself is a coping mechanism for you when you eventually does fail in your life. Because guess what? You're still human and you're still probably going to fail in your life. You cannot always get like 100 for every single test, and it's probably going to hurt you really, really bad. The way that humility is taught being taught within the Asian society itself is very apparent. Like, we tell you that don't be too arrogant or you will fall. Do not just think of yourself as someone that's like inherently good, for example, because there's going to be a day where you're not going to be able to do something when you're not going to be able to complete this sort of like expectation. This is what's going to be happening later. That's why we really need this kind of like coping mechanism for you to actually be able to cope with the fact of failure. But also B, we tell you that arrogance itself is really, really bad, because especially when you fail, you feel like you're failing really, really hard. Exactly, because when you're arrogant, exactly because you view yourself as someone that's really important. For example, when you lose a competition, you feel like you're really, really bad, when that is not necessarily the case. Because guess what? Every single people is probably working just as hard as you do, right? This is exactly perfectly illustrates to you panels why we actually need this sort of like humility, so that we're able to actually completely value ourselves in a better way. Why then on our side of the house are we probably going to be able to value ourselves better? First, when you don't focus on showing off, when you don't focus on actually being seen as someone that's good, you're going to be able to actually put enough effort on yourself. But also B, on a personal effort, there's going to be like much less comparison, because I feel okay with not always being the best person in the room, because I know that other people are just working just as hard as me. For example, Bali and Sumut both work hard for this position, for example, right? And we tell you that we're actually perfectly fine we're perfectly fine with this sort of like comparison, and we do not compare ourselves to other people, and we do not blame ourselves when we actually fail, because we don't have that level of arrogance. And even when we lose this sort of like competition, for example, you're still always going to feel better, because guess what? Now you don't really because you understand that this sort of like competition itself is natural to happen. I'll take the POI. What makes arrogance so good on our side of the house is a manifestation that people actually have the chance to exactly compete like according to your framing. It's not about how they're going to compare themselves towards other people.
I think when you have arrogance, I think in every single circumstances, it is perfectly natural for you to lose. On their side of the house, when you have arrogance, when you lose, it's going to hit really, really hard. Because guess what? when you have arrogance, you feel as if like you're better than other people, for example. You feel like the way you project stuff, for example, and like you want to actually like maintain this sort of like version of yourself that's like inherently good, for example. That is exactly what is so harmful. Yes, because when you inherently fail, it's going to be really, really bad when you're outside of the house. Onto the second issue then, on why people will still feel accomplished on our side of the house. They tell you that on our side of the house, people are likely to just like not fight, for example, just because they feel that themselves as better. First response to this, we already tell you that just because you're humble does not mean that you value yourself less. It's just going to become like you actually appreciate other people more, so you understand that's going to be people better than you. But also second, we tell you just because you don't gloat or just because you don't actually flaunt your actual things that you do does not mean that people is just going to like suddenly do not credit you at all. We tell you that even if you don't gloat, people around you will still probably celebrate you. For example, your friends, your family, they're still probably going to be there and they're probably going to like celebrate all of the stuff that you did to yourself. We tell you that your inherent self-value is not about whether or not you're humble, because guess what? Just because you're humble does not mean that you let other people trample on you. Just because I'm humble does not mean that if other people are like discriminating towards me, I would just like not do anything about it, right? Understand that the entire framing on this side of the house is to tell you just because you're humble, you're going to let other people trample on you. We tell you that is impossible, because guess what? You probably know that when someone is like discriminating you, there's probably like certain grounds on it, for example. Or like when they tell you that your boss giving you like extra work, you're going to like just take it, for example, right? We tell you that it is not exactly because of humility, you just take that extra work. It's probably like there's a lot of externalities coming from the other side of the house. Guess what? When your boss gives you this kind of stuff, it is about the dynamic in power, for example, or like how your boss is like how your boss have like a larger power, for example, and you're not likely to just like fight against your boss, for example. But even if you're likely to fight against your boss, we tell you that it's not about humility, because guess what? Because guess what? Arrogance does not mean that you're just likely to just fight off against your boss. We tell you that arrogance itself is inherently wrong, because arrogance itself offends other people. When I'm being arrogant, people around me are not going to like me, because guess what? I'm going to view myself as actually better than other people. The way that we view arrogance is that we project ourselves into the sort of like arrogance itself. Arrogance is something that's like so niche that we're able to actually notice it in like our daily conversation. If I'm being arrogant, like talking right now, then you guys will probably notice it. That is the problem with arrogance in and of itself, because it offends a lot of different people. When you offend people that you don't really need to offend, then what is exactly the delta within this debate? Because they tell you that arrogance itself is like so inherently good, because now you're able to stand up for yourself. We tell you that arrogance itself do not really matter when you're like valuing yourself, because you can still value yourself while you are being humble. Just because I'm humble does not mean that I don't value myself a lot. Just because I'm humble with all of my achievement does not mean that I value myself much less than when I'm being arrogant. When the value of like yourself inherently is going to be very dependent. It's going to be very dependent on like the way you perceive your value in and of itself.
All right, thank you so much, second op, for the speech. To continue the debate, third prop.
It was oddly convenient for Team Sumut to only engage to the size of our cases when it worked for them. They only want to talk about Asian on Asian culture, and they do not want to talk about Asian and minority communities, Asian fighting for their life, to be able to adapt to the Western culture, etc., etc. Those are things we given to you at the top of proposition, and their only attempt at negating it was framing it out. That is insufficient. Panels, I'll prove to you why. Before my clashes then, 2 points of set clear. Firstly, if it is true that everyone sees themselves as equal, then I do not see the delta in this debate here, right? Because if their analysis was that everybody will still see themselves as having self-worth to an extent and still will be respectful to a certain extent, then it means we do not need this humility in the first place, and it means that it feeds into our urgency. But secondly, the LO cannot get away with just saying that it's not that people will downplay themselves, it's just seeing other people as more. Because inherently, seeing people as more is putting down yourself as seeing people as less. You cannot see yourself because like the amount of the confidence you have is relative to how much you weigh yourself against other people or something like that. But two clashes I'm going to posit to you in this debate then. Firstly, under do people actually still want this humility? And secondly, is this important to the culture and life? So first clash then, under do people still want to do this humility in the first place? But but our case, given at the top of the proposition, was that to an extent people don't want to do this anymore, and this was our urgency. What was their mitigation? Firstly, they said that this exists in in a culture and spectrum, therefore that it's not dictatorship-like. Three responses to this. Firstly, then I think that at best there will still be a push to be like humility to a certain to a much greater extent, right? Given that given that people already raise their child to be respectful to a certain extent, people are already there's a rise of like caring about other people's feeling, etc., etc. It means the problem is like for these children who are like the child of immigrants. It means it's the problem is if we buy into LO's characterization that peoples of the West do not have humility to a certain extent, the vulnerable people we should talk about are these Asian immigrant kids who get bullied at school, who get downplayed by their friends and peers at schools because they can never stand up for themselves, right? This is why there's a turning point, and there's an idea that these kids actually want to stand up for themselves, but they get confused on a day-to-day basis to what extent they can actually stand up for themselves, because they're constantly told by their parents they should just be humility. If they're getting bullied, it's just making jokes or something like that. They can never stand up for themselves. But secondly, then, given that there's a constant push and an emphasis, then why would it be? Then it means it disproves that it will be on a good side of the spectrum, right? Because all you're doing under side opposition, if you're saying you want to keep on entrenching it, it means you're only going to bring it at the worser side of the spectrum, at the more conservative side of the spectrum. It's unlikely to develop. Second thing they told you, it's you're likely to still have friends that feel the same way, and therefore there's reciprocity or something like that. Three responses to this. Firstly, this proves to you panels that their entire case is contingent on reciprocity, right? At the point of which these children are not around other Asian kids or other Asian people who do practice this humility back at them, it is very harmful towards these people because their expectation of other people is very high. They expect everyone to be humility to them too, but when they understand that not everybody in this world is likely to do that to them, they're likely to become very disappointed. They're likely to not know how to react to these other people, right? But secondly, what does it look like under our side? We think that under opposition, the amount of humility you will be taught is much more extreme than just smiling or bowing down to other people, right? It's going to be told like you're not you shouldn't standing up for yourself. It becomes very hard because you never know to what extent you could stand up for yourself, and while you're constantly being bullied like that. The third thing they told you is that at worst, people still smile, and therefore the benefits is not contingent on you as a person wanting to do this humility. But two problems with that. Firstly, it entrenches your deep down unhappiness, right? Because you're already getting bullied on a day-to-day spectrum. You're already being very tired of your parents constantly telling you on a day-to-day basis that you're not respect enough to them, that you do not value their friends enough to them. It only entrenches you inside, and it makes you go on and on into a boiling point, at the point of which you actually retaliate, at the point of which you cannot take it anymore, and it means people are much more likely to become radical under their side because you keep on pushing them towards their limits, because everybody to a certain extent has a breaking point. But secondly, then you always feel like you're getting to the breaking point faster than everybody else. You always feel that inside, deep down, you feel like a really bad person because you just can't take it anymore, that you have to accept other people, but everyone else around you seems like they're doing fine, because you never know what people are feeling behind the back doors, and it means you constantly feel like you are the worst person in the world because you do feel some sort of hatred that you cannot reciprocate this humility to the best extent. And insofar as side opposition do not prove to us the likelihood that their parents are going to teach them to take this humility in a good way, is at the point of which they cannot win this debate. But lastly, then they say that it looks like only respecting the elders or something like that. But I'm gonna flip this claim, right? Because the biggest problem in most Asian communities, I guess this is a different point, I'm not trying to generalize here, but a lot of them do feel like some sort of resentment towards their parents or elders. They're very unlikely to be able to stand up towards them, especially if the world is changing with globalization or etc. etc. It's very hard for them to correct their parents, to correct the views of their parents, and the problem is the problem is much bigger than just day-to-day conversations, right? It's shaping the future for these children, because these parents are likely to have more older views, right? And they're unlikely to be able to talk to their parents in a good way, because they think that they have to weigh humility the highest, and they're constantly told by their parents that they need to weigh it the highest. So what is the implication on this clash then? It means people on an most people on average do not actually want to practice this to a certain extent, because if all they want to do is smile or bow down, I think that most people will be able to do that. What we're talking about here is like the extent that's much more extreme than that. The extent that you're not supposed to like talk about your feelings or how you feel like offended or something like that, and just take it and just bite down the bullet. But before I move on to second clash, just I'll take point. I think arrogance is human nature. You get that the moment you come out of the womb. We want to benefit ourselves naturally, but humility is not. You require a teaching or principle before you believe in that. Okay, I'll engage to that later in my second clash. I'll flag it when I engage to that. Second clash then, under the importance to culture and life. What are their responses down the bench? Firstly, they said that outsider and tourists only do this because they were never taught to become humility in their own home fields. First response to this is that if they are never taught, they are probably taught to still do and act well by their parents. It was very uncharitable for them to say that everybody else is taught to be disrespectful, right? But secondly, even if this is true, it means like they are already resilient to other outsiders because that's what they grow up with. But the problem is when they engage with other Asians, these Asian people do not actually have a defense mechanism. Here's where I want to engage with that POI on arrogance. Several things under this. Firstly, I think there are already social sanctions to being arrogant, right? It likely look like you're losing your friends because people do not want to be around you if you're that arrogant to that extreme extent, and means people will still be charitable to a certain extent. But secondly, on a comparative then, because they want to talk about Asians likely being competitive, and it means you need to have some sort of humility. I posit to you that under our side it will be better, because if you not get the best medal, I think that there will be still humility to a certain extent. The implication is then under our side you will be told by your parents, it's okay to not achieve the best. You could still try to do better. Like you should learn from this person because he's probably better than you or something like that. Comparatively under their side, you're just going to be pushed down and being told that medal is not important in the first place, that you have to be more humility or something like that, and they're unlikely to respect you. Look, the problem here is, and look, for as far as long as humanity has gone, there has been much more teaching about caring about other people's feelings, and that is the structural reason that people under our side will still care about feelings to a certain extent. At least people stand up under our side as vote for Bali.
All right, thanks so much, third prop, for that speech. To continue the debate, third op.
Am I audible like this? Yep, okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Standing up for myself does not require arrogance. I don't need to think that I'm the best at something to stand up for myself. I just need to think that I have a basic human value to be able to defend myself. I do not need to think that I'm necessarily better than everybody. This is the exact reason why Proposition case falls, because their characterization of harm requires the idea that arrogance means that when you stand up for yourself, you need arrogance. You need to feel that you're better than everybody. But Judge, you do not need that. You just need to believe that you have a basic human value. So whatever harm Proposition posits within their side of the house it does not exist because of the lack of humility, but because of the emphasis of humility, but it exists simply because these individuals just cannot do it. Simply, for example, it looks like structural issues like, I don't know, capitalism that tells you can never fight against your boss. It looks like things like patriarchy that tells you can never fight against the father in your family. I think just because you suddenly lack humility, will you suddenly fight over this? If Proposition wants to champion that case, they need to mechanize over all of these social implications that they never actually did within their speech. Because specifically in Asian societies, it is these exact values that exist so strongly that will never be fought upon. I think that's why their case doesn't stand. Few things I want to note before moving on to clashes. First of all, what is humility, right? Because if you note this Proposition, they tell you that humility just means you feel like you inherently have no value. Judge, that's not true. We're all Asian, we all have humility. But the thing is, we still have self-value. We just believe that that you are not always the best and that your value fluctuates over time. And that's why you're not willing to think that I am the best in the world. You are not willing to be arrogant. I think you can imagine yourself judge what an arrogant person looks like and what a person with humility looks like. And just because someone has humility does not mean that they're going to double down on everything and just be quiet. I don't think that's a charitable characterization. And if you notice, the entirety of Proposition's case relies on that. All the way until whip speech, they never engage in their very own worst case scenario. I think that's why they lose. But then, second of all, they tell you that coercion to follow norm becomes a tipping point in this debate. I don't think that's true, because coercion to follow a norm exists in every single society. Every single norm is somewhat coercive, right? So I think this cannot become a tipping point within Proposition side of the house. That is to say, when I tell you that you have to be kind, that's also coercion. You can be not kind, but coercion is necessary. So I don't think that particular metric can become a tipping point. But then finally, I don't think coercion happens simply because you still have a choice to want to be arrogant or not within their own framings, that there are arrogant people on our side of the house. That it's just telling you to do so. You're not actually forced to do so, right? But then finally, I think there is a social benefit you get from being kind. People love you so much for having humility. People like you a lot. People favor your personality. So this means you do actually get something out of it. It's not necessarily coercion. But then thirdly, right, I think a lot of the cases that were impacts brought within their third speaker's speech were not mechanized. For example, you don't want to communicate with your parents. No mechanization within their first or second on why that's going to happen. But suddenly they say, the existence of too much humility just means you're not going to communicate with your parents. I think you need to judge the impacts and whether or not they actually do mechanize them within their speech. Okay, moving on then. But then finally, right, I think that on Proposition, if they want to champion any sort of idea of naturally existing kindness, their kindness is based on utility. This means that if the person does not have any function towards them, they are not going to be kind to them because they need to have a value for them. That means they get to pick and choose. But with the emphasis of individual humility, it means that individuals always think that it's a virtue to do so. Individuals will always be humility. I think the impact of kindness largely exists within Proposition side of the house. Three clashes. One, we're going to talk about the social dynamic internally in Asia. Second of all, we're going to talk about diasporas. Thirdly, we're going to talk about tourism, and that is largely an unimplemented clash, I think, in this debate. Firstly, we're going to discuss on a social dynamic internally in Asia. What did Opposition tell you here? We told you that people are arrogant. Why is this true on two layers? One, that we have a natural survival instinct. That is to say that we always want to be good. We always want to be the best. And in the instances we are able to achieve this, we are arrogant. We can see this in the entire race of the animal kingdom, which we are considered as animals, in which we feel the need to be arrogant and show ourselves over everybody. We need to be able to assert dominance. We need to be able to be arrogant. But then on the second layer, that there is a validation that we need naturally as humans. So the easiest way for us to feel this is when someone says good things about us, we naturally feel arrogant because we feel like we're validated, right? I think whatever they tell you as a comparative that humans are naturally able to overcome arrogance is entirely just not true, simply because human nature is arrogant, right? This is harmful because you think yourself as better. You do not want to compromise with other individuals. The only response Opposition gave to this case was they say that, but there are also sanctions to be individuals who are bad. Judge, this does not kill the case coming in from Opposition, where we tell you, overall, people are going to start being arrogant to each other without this specific dynamic, right? But then third, so we tell you that there is an urgency to double down on it. But even if we buy into Proposition's best case scenario, humans aren't inherently arrogant. What is true is that society naturally already awards the most incredible people that exist in society. So by social contract, we are already hurt, right? That's why we need humility. I think the urgency still largely exists within Opposition side of the house. Three things, therefore, again, that we're going to mention. One, we're going to talk about the pushover mentality when Opposition says that you're oppressed. They tell you that the core of oppression that exists is because you believe that you shouldn't be a pushover at the end of the day. You're not going to fight back because you have humility. Let's note the examples that they give you. In the workplace, in tourism, for example, this is not because these individuals feel like they are less. No, these individuals are mad. Workers are mad. They believe they have a value. They know they are mad. The issue is that they cannot fight out. Because, for example, at work, you're going to end up getting fired if you talk over your boss. You know that this is going to be true. I think that the problem that exists in Proposition was not pinpointed exactly from humility. Their case largely is unimportant because of this very reason. But then finally, I think in the internal Asian society itself, this is circumvented, because if every single individual believes that humility is important, then why are we going to be arrogant and why are we going to push down other people? Within their speech, they have yet to engage with that, sure.
How is the virtue of humility is not going to be burdening when we already framed to you being humility is not that easy?
I think that it will be somewhat burdening, but that is every single norm in society. You cannot always be kind because you need to be mean. I don't think burden becomes a necessarily large harm, insofar that one, we already told you you got something out of it, but that two, on the overall scale of society, you are kind, for example, and that is just overall good. So I don't think that itself as a response is enough, right? But then third of all, on social conflict, right? We explained to you very largely that social conflict is going to exist if everybody is arrogant, if people believe, and especially in Asian societies, because we are extra into patriarchy, we are extra into having seniority, for example, we are extra into the kiasu culture when we always have to do something is better. When this is the case and everybody is arrogant, nobody is going to feel good about themselves. It's exactly with the existence of reciprocity that even their own case flags is exactly why we are able to get a better social dynamic. I think the largest core case on why a proposition loses is simple. They just don't have the right examples in this debate. Every single case they brought was not related to the too much humility within status quo. But then second of all, we're going to talk about diasporas. They tell you that diasporas are stereotyped, right? Judge the stereotypes of diasporas does not necessarily stem from this. And I think if you want to talk about, because of all of this, that they're going to get stereotyped to expected into a certain thing, I don't think that's true, because I don't think a random Western guy is affected by the emphasis placed on individual humility, because the motion places that it's only within Asian societies. They don't really care about it, so I don't think they're going to put an expectation upon these individuals. But finally, even it's about the expression of commonly Asian kids are like that, and all those kinds of things, and you expect an Asian kid to do that. Firstly, we already explained why that's not the case, but finally, why is that so harmful, right? Because if the Asian kid is the good kid, everyone's gonna love the Asian kid. We flip the case, because now everybody loves humility. Everyone, even a random white person in America, is gonna love humility because they're kind to you. And I think because of this, you care more about diasporas on their side of the house. Asian societies actually have more value, and I think that's why we win in opposition.
All right, thanks so much, Stir Up, for the speech. Now we come to the reply section. I call upon the opposition reply. Here.
Panels, think of the nicest person you know, the most nonchalant, humble guy you've ever met in your life. I think assuming that someone decided to, I don't know, hit them, detriment them, or jeopardize them in any way, shape, or form, even if they were humble, do you think they just stand there and take it face value and apologize? I don't think so. I think the problem in this debate is simple. It's whether or not humility is good or harmful, and whether the principality of it is actually generally good. I think Prop addresses Up's case very simply at our worst. They basically consider humility causes things like, say, self-degradation, that all foreigners demean Asia. I think even if you believe this, very uncharitable view, at the end of the day, UP will prove to you why we still champion regardless. Now, let's weigh. What is the impact of humility? I think the stance of humility UP gave you is say that it's embodied in a component of culture. How does proposition reply? They tell you something that is they demonize humility from the very get-go. They portray it as something that's inherently negative as a trait. Two responses. I think one, they jeopardize their side of the world by saying that humility is just, something that's bad, because, well, what? You still have humility on side proposition. It's just that you don't emphasize it. I think this is something that's very demeaning in the first place. But secondly, I think the alternative is arrogance. Let's be very generous. I think even if the harms they gave us on humility were true, my question is simple. Why is arrogance so much better? Now, I know that they answered this. Let me actually expand. Parallel. Let's actually draw it out. I think Prop doesn't have humility. They have arrogance. Simple. Congratulations. Asia, who was apparently vulnerable to mistreatment, vulnerable to foreigners who treated them badly, now become arrogant. Now they can stand up for themselves, right? But here's a big problem, panels. I think one, you become the arrogant foreigner. You become the arrogant person in context. I don't think this is something that's inherently good either. Why? Because all the negative actions that they said arrogant foreigners would do is linked to one thing, that the fact that they are arrogant, which means that if our people too become arrogant, what's the guarantee that they won't act like these arrogant quote-unquote foreigners? But more importantly too, standing up for yourself does not require arrogance. It's called, humanity. It's called self-value. It's called impersonal importance. It's called the ability of fear that everyone has a certain check and balance in them. Like, if I am hit, I feel scared and I want to defend myself, right? That is basic human nature. We have that. But not all tourists will be arrogant. I think at the end of the day, the characterization was that, well, everyone would just be inherently bad. But okay, even assuming all tourists were arrogant, well, 99% of people in Asia is not tourists. 99% of people in Asia is locals. I think I'd rather have that 1% tourists be arrogant than 99% of my people be arrogant. So why did I spend like 1 minute or something on talking about tourists? I think it's because P1 and P2 spent the majority of their case talking about tourists too and the negative impacts, which at the best, even if we concede, is a very minor case. But secondly, what is the principality here? Panels, would you opt into a society, a social circle, or just basically anywhere, a culture in nature that is humble and also values humility or arrogance? I think at the most basic level, this is very clear according to you. Understand that we come out of the world, we want what? We want the attention of our parents. When we are at school, we prioritize ourselves and our grades. What? When we're in the workplace, we want the promotion. Arrogance is a human nature. It already exists everywhere. It exists because that is selfishness. Selfishness that exists within us. We want the best for ourselves. Who doesn't? That is why we have to teach the principle of humility, because it's not something that comes out of our brain. We want things that are best for ourselves because of human nature, but we don't want to help everyone naturally, and we don't want to respect everyone naturally if it were not taught to us, if our parents didn't tell us that it was something that's important, if we didn't emphasize it in our society, that you have to bow to your seniors, that you have to be respectful, because that's not something that comes out naturally, that I wake up Sunday, I'm like, oh, I want to be humble, I want to practice humility. That's not how it works. But okay, how do they engage? They tell you that social sanctions will prove that arrogance itself will still be contained. I think even if you were isolated, here's the problem with arrogance. They don't care about external costs like losing friends, because so long as you thought you were right, so long as you believe you're right, it doesn't matter. But also, the people that I do not know, like strangers who bump into me, I will still practice arrogance on them for the simple reason that I don't know them and I don't care if they isolate me or whatever. Right? But more importantly, I think prop is fighting in a vacuum. That governments, I think the idea of Asian culture being humble itself also means that the people, not just tourists, not just locals, but also say governments, say institutions, say your family, say the environments, they never properly address this. I think even if I practice what proposition preach, I would not end this debate by shaking their hands. That's exactly why it's so important, so proud to propose.
Thank you so much, Op Reply, for that speech. Last but not least, Prop Reply. Here.
I forgot to mention this earlier, but trigger warning regarding minorities, I'm going to try my best not to generalize. Check, check, check. Am I finally audible? Okay, nice. Okay. Check. Yay. Okay then. 3, 2, 1. Immediately, two things that I'd like to point out of the entirety of this debate. One, the delta of this debate is quite blurry because of the LO speech. The delta of this debate lays in the emphasis of it. Specifically, this looks like on our side, you only teach humility by your parents, as we've mechanized before since my first speech. On their side, they're enforced by society themselves, by your teachers, strangers, to which they know better. They even admit this under opposition side of the house. This puts more pressure on you as an individual at the end of the day. But secondly, opposition is very bold to say that we are the ones uncharitable when they keep pushing our worst case, which is complete self-interest and complete ego. Even though we've explicitly say that we're aiming for the middle ground, we prove to you with likelihood ever since first, parents do not want their child to be bullied or be a pushover, and I've explained their value on culture as well. The mix of that is the reason why I have ego to speak for NSDC, but still have sportsmanship to Sumut at the end of the day when the emphasis isn't that prominent at the end of the day. But onto my two clashes then, regarding arrogance and societal. They posit to you that we make individual egoistical. We posit to you instead that it gives them a degree of bravery. What they lack is likelihood. Simply, we think it's irrational to take all parents on our side, suddenly teach arrogance. They don't fall to their gaslighting. But if there are irrational parents out there, we bite the bullet. Two things: A, they're still marginal. B, you need a degree of arrogance for confidence. That's why we choose mid-ground. Sumut's extreme case is against the complexity of human nature. At the end of the day, we think there is something when describing humans being that one-dimensional in their entirety of the speech. And let's bite the bullet here, and just to be safe, 4 times already, and say that this might lead to arrogant people in status quo. Again, this is a very extreme case, like my second and third have previously negated, yet they still ignore it. But B, when they are arrogant, we think in a way it is justified, especially when you've been oppressed for so long. When your rights have been taken away, you deserve to be arrogant to actually fight for their rights at the end of the day, like my second had posited to you. The weighing is simple then. Which confidence is better? Simply, it's ours because two things. A, don't fall to the gaslighting of third opposition, because to stand up for yourself, it requires confidence, and confidence requires pride, that is ego. Bravery for standing up is ego, like my second and third have mechanized before. But B, let's try to opt into opposition's mechanization of their confidence is from survivability. Simply, if I get berated by a tourist back in Bali, I'll be confident to run because I have no bravery or ego to actually stand up for myself. But see, on them trying to discredit my third Edgar, this matter is new matter on their third as well. But on to my second point, regarding societal push. We posit to you that corporate selves are how they are right now because of emphasis on humility. They posit that corporate slavery isn't that bad. Simply, if it isn't that bad, why is the worker there still suffering in Japan? Why are there still overworked people there? So much overworked people there actually. Why is it not as utopic as Sumut frames? Simply, this is gaslighting because it is not true in status quo. If you notice, workforce in the West is much nicer than Asian countries because West workers aren't scared of standing up for themselves. That's why the check and balance is better. This is what we try to posit to you ever since my very first speech, right? This is what we push on comparison. They stay in status quo where humility benefits those in power because humility requires a degree of course, humiliation and what we quote unquote lower ourselves for. Coercion, we say that coercion exists in the West, sure, but it's not as bad exactly because if it's unreasonable, there's retaliation from people, right? And we posit that it will be bad for tourism. They say that tourist Asia in marginal. Let me shoplift some things. Indonesia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, those are all tourist regions. And most of Asian countries are still developing countries heavily dependent on tourism. Not only that, Singapore is an industrial country, but also dependent on tourism to a degree. So they're trying to frame out a lot of actors. Don't buy into their gaslighting. But weighing then, okay, sure, if you don't buy the tourism thing, we still win on three folds. A, we still change the optic of people of Asians. They no longer be seen as total pushovers under our side. Yes, we take the trade-off of them being seen as arrogant, but that simply means that they are able to defend themselves, that they have the ability to actually stand up for themselves, so people won't actually disturb them, but be exactly like what their first tutor tried to push on seniority and patriarchy is what enables bullying, especially people of power, to abuse their power, etc., especially if you don't actually stand up to yourself. This is a harm that they yet try to negate, but see, they still never engage on pressure, how big it will be, especially on these children at the end of the day, especially of this victim of bullying, that they can stand up for themselves. The negation is simply aren't that prominent. All reasons above, proud to propose.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for reply for that speech, and that concludes the debate. Again, this is not a silent round, so there will be verbal announcement. So yeah, you can cross bench and shake hands, and yeah, go back to. Go out the room. Don't go anywhere like really far, since you need to go back after this. Thank you.
karena kita semua generasi hebat. Yeay, ayo lakukan bersama 7 kebiasaan anak Indonesia. Karakter pribadi yang kuat karena kita semua generasi hebat. Yeay.
Selamat datang di Gedung Slamet Riyadi, Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta. Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta dengan bangga menjadi tuan rumah Lomba Debat Indonesia tahun 2025. Ajang yang mempertemukan para pemikir muda terbaik dari SMA seluruh Indonesia. Di sini, gagasan diuji, keberanian diuji, dan logika dipertajam. Kompetisi ini bukan hanya tentang menang, tetapi tentang bagaimana setiap peserta menyuarakan masa depan.